Hello, I'm Ali Murtaza, Head of Design at IDEATE Innovation. This is Daftarkhwan Insights. Hello everyone, welcome to Design in the World. This is our fourth episode called Design and Faith. I'm Ali Murtaza. There are a bunch of my teammates are in the crowd too, so nice to see you guys. Even though you traveled with me, but we'll pretend like I just saw you. Thank you everyone else for coming. IDEATE is a human-centered design firm. We're distributed all over Pakistan because we're fully remote. And people here are from Karachi, Islamabad, and Lahore predominantly. We do a lot of research work and user experience design work. You can follow us by going to ideateinnovation.com. So this series of talks that we do, this is the fourth episode. The idea behind this was that a lot of the times designers tend to remain in our own bubbles. अगर कोई UX designer है तो वो Figma पे अपनी ज़िंदगी गुजार देता है. अगर कोई researcher है तो वो field में होता है. But oftentimes we're very narrowly tied to जिस चीज़ पे हम काम कर रहे होते हैं. अगर आप एक product company में हैं, which I've been as well, you get very tied to कि वो product क्या बनाते हैं, आपकी पूरी ज़िंदगी उसी के around revolve करती है, which is natural for somebody who goes deep into their work. So the idea was that design also relates to a lot of other things in the world that aren't necessarily very obviously about design. तो हमने कुछ वो चीज़ें explore करनी थी, and some of those topics have included in the past episodes. Law, what else did we do? War, again, topics that you wouldn't think necessarily relate to design, but that was part of the whole idea कि उसके अंदर design कैसे connect करते हैं और designers का क्या role होता है in larger topics में. So आज का topic जो है, which I think in some people's definitions would be the largest topic there can be, which is around faith और उसमें क्या role designers play करते हैं. And we'll sort of talk about this in a few different ways. The first one being, what is faith? Again, कोई सही गलत आंसर नहीं है because मुझे मेरे पास भी सही आंसर नहीं है. So what do you think faith is? Set of beliefs that guide your life. Yes. Anything else? You said
believing in the unknown.
Believing in the unknown. Anything else? Spirituality. Sure. See, all of this, I think, all of us here probably relate to all of these things as being true, which is why I was saying कि कोई गलत आंसर नहीं है. It's very personal. So a definition that you can find is great trust or confidence in something or someone. और trust की जो बात है, as I think you were alluding to, कि unknown में भी हो सकता है. So it doesn't necessarily need to be कि यार ये इसका proof दिखाओ मुझे, and then I believe your proof, and that's why I have faith in it. It can be a bit unknown. It can be just based on whatever you feel about something. लेकिन ये definition I liked because it kind of breaks faith down into trust and confidence, which I feel like seem much more definable. कि आपको इस चीज़ में confidence है, आपको इस चीज़ में trust है, seems slightly easier to have a conversation about. So I'll be using this as a reference in different points here. कोई example दे सकते हैं चीज़ों में जिसमें आपको बहुत ज़्यादा trust है या confidence है? Faith से बेशक छोड़ दें अभी, अगर confidence के बारे में सोच लें, trust के बारे में सोच लें. In the internet. Fair. I wouldn't be anywhere without the internet. Anything else? The Manchester United manager. Just Manchester United fan here. Anyone else?
In oneself, perhaps, or something.
Sure, yes. Well, you can have confidence in yourself. Trust या confidence build कैसे होता है किसी चीज़ में? Does something, for instance, एक chair है. Do you trust that this chair won't break? Probably that because you're sitting on it. But वो किस तरह है? Why do you have that trust in that chair? Let's say chair का example ले लें. सारे बैठे हुए, किसी ने probably नहीं सोचा होगा कि टूटेगी कि नहीं. Why do you have trust that the chair won't break or confidence? Past experience, build quality. Sure. Right. लेकिन आप लोगों ने probably बैठने से पहले chair test नहीं की होगी, right? So at some level you had faith that the chair won't break. So that's sort of an example of how faith can be sort of, for trust in something can be built through your experiences, through what your perception of something is. Is it earned in a way कि आप कोई और चाहे इंसान हो या कोई चीज़ हो जो आप बना रहे हैं, can it earn somebody's trust over time, or is trust something जो inherent है, किसी चीज़ का में होता है, किसी में नहीं होता? How does this work?
It has to be earned.
It has to be earned. Okay. Anything else?
It's a long process.
Sure. It's a process. आहिस्ता trust building हो रही है, faith build हो रहा है. ठीक है, बिल्कुल सही है. आप लोगों में से कितने लोगों को पता है कि जहाज़ कैसे उड़ता है? How does it manage to remain up in the air?
Magic.
Faith, physics, faith, magic, all of them are correct answers, I think. मैं बड़ी बार जहाज़ में बैठा हूँ और मुझे नहीं भी पता था तभी मैं बैठा था। somehow मैंने कहा कि उड़ जाएगा। जी स्टूपिड सी चीज़ है कि एक मेटल बॉक्स है जिसमें मैं बैठा हूँ और मुझे नहीं पता है कैसे हवा में रहेगा, बट आई एम जस्ट लाइक ये रहेगा और मैं इसमें बैठा रहूँगा। एंड देयर इज़ अ लेवल ऑफ फेथ और ट्रस्ट दैट क्लियरली these airplanes have, that we trust without in the whole crowd only one person having some sort of an understanding of how this works, but we clearly trust it, have faith that it will stay up in the air, hopefully. How about a smaller aircraft? Is there more or less trust? अब वो छोटा इंजन हो गया है। Does this reduce the trust?
Yes.
So faith directly proportional to the size of the engine है। सही है। So basically वो बड़ा जहाज somehow आप ज़्यादा ट्रस्ट कर रहे थे, क्यों?
Because more people have traveled before.
Sure.
More frequent.
More frequent, okay. So it's about like कितनी बार कोई चीज़ हुई है, तो over time trust build हो रहा है किसी चीज़ में, and it now has earned your faith that this will stay up in some way. How about a helicopter? Like इसमें और छोटे जहाज में, which do you trust more? Helicopter? Anyone else? ऐसे कोई एक जिसको फिजिक्स आती है उसको हेलीकॉप्टर में ट्रस्ट नहीं है। I wonder what that means. Anyone else? Anyone else for the helicopter team? Okay. और बाकी छोटे प्लेन में ज़्यादा ट्रस्ट किसको है? So छोटे प्लेन में ज़्यादा ट्रस्ट है लोगों को ओवरऑल, ठीक है। थोड़ा सी डिफरेंस है वैसे। अच्छा, तो clearly there is a different level of trust as you go from the larger plane to the smaller plane to the helicopter. We've defined some reasons कि बहुत फ्लाइट्स हो चुकी हैं, आपने देखा है कि वो लैंड कर जाता है। Hopefully you've done after you've done it a few times it becomes easier कि अच्छा this will remain up. Necessarily doesn't have anything to do with you understanding the physics of it or having tested कि जहाज़ का इंजन ख़राब तो नहीं है। Somehow all of us are also at some point I think trusting somebody else कि उनको अपना काम आता है, right? The pilot or whoever, इन्होंने वर्दी पहनी हुई, इनको पता है ये क्या कर रहे हैं, hopefully will get us there. I haven't said anything. How about the bigger plane? अब उसके आप उस पर जो लोगो लगा हुआ है, does that matter? पहले किसी ने लोगो नोटिस किया था इस पे कौन सा था? उनको डेफिनेटली नोटिस किया। There's probably a lot of preconceived notions flying in कि इसके बाद इसका क्या मतलब है, ये PIA है और वो एयर ब्लू है और ये कोई जहाज़ है जो उड़ता है। And somehow we trusted that जहाज़, is there a varying level here? थोड़ा सा पाकिस्तान का नहीं है तो ज़्यादा ट्रस्ट था उसके अंदर। So they're clearly even जहाज़ itself maybe same ही, I actually don't know, लेकिन potentially very similar looking, we probably won't know the difference, but there's something else that also changes the level of faith we have in the process, right? So even beyond the thing which might be the same. So उसमें लोग operate कौन कर रहे हैं, maybe the system that we trust less or more. So there's some other factors that come in, right? कितने लोगों ने कोविड की वैक्सीन लगवाई थी? सबने, ठीक है। नहीं भी लगवाई तो खैर है, आई एम नॉट जजिंग हियर एट दिस पॉइंट, मे बी साल पहले करता। जब लगवाने से पहले या बाद में, या स्पेशली अगर आप किसी को यहाँ ऐसे हैं जिन्होंने अपनी फैमिली में कोई बच्चों को वैक्सीन लगवाई, उससे पहले कोई लेवल ऑफ फियर था, उसके लिए कुछ किया, वो किसी को फियर था लगवाने से पहले कि क्या होगा? एनी फियर? हाउ मेनी हैड एनी सॉर्ट ऑफ फियर अराउंड द वैक्सीन? सम पीपल डिड। What did you do about it? Did people do more research? What did you do? कोई did more research? ठीक है। कितने लोग थे वैसे जिन्होंने जनरली नहीं भी डर था तो वैक्सीन के बारे में रिसर्च की थी कि कहाँ से आ रही है, क्या है ये, anything of that sort? So quite a few people. I feel like pretty much everyone. ठीक है। बचपन में या बाद में कभी किसी को कोई ऐसी चोट लगी है जो मेटल वगैरह से लगी हो, उसके बाद एक कहते हैं टीका लगवा लें जाके, तो कौन सा टीका होता है? वो क्या होता है? वायरस होता है? वायरस होता है, टीका होता है? राइट। क्या होता है उससे, उस वायरस से क्या होता है? सॉरी? श्योर। और वो वैक्सीन पे किसी ने रिसर्च की? सर किसने लगवाई हुई है यहाँ टेटनस की वैक्सीन? मैं मल्टीपल टाइम्स लगवाई, मल्टीपल टाइम्स किसने लगवाई है? कभी रिसर्च की? क्यों? देखा मैंने भी नहीं की, मैं किसी को जज नहीं कर रहा। Why did we never research कि हमें टेटनस की वैक्सीन क्यों लग रही है, पर did probably research के कोविड क्यों लग रही है, उसमें क्या मिला है? Any ideas? For sure. Right. So इसमें maybe there is a connection between how people trusted planes, the bigger planes, they've been around a long time, a lot of people have flown, so maybe over time it has earned our trust, कि ये चलती है, वी डोंट नीड टू वरी अबाउट इट टू अ लेवल वेयर वी डोंट इवन थिंक अबाउट इट, कि चेयर्स पे इतनी बार बैठे हैं कि चेयर पे बैठते हो पहले हर कोई चेक नहीं करता कि चेयर रहेगी इधर के नहीं. So partially similar sort of reasons, even though very different domain. एक जगह पे जहाज हैं, chairs हैं, vaccines हैं, but at some level our trust or faith in things somehow is associated with the time that's elapsed, is what we're getting at. Did anyone hear of this company recently? Yeah. Eli Lilly and Company. किसी ने recently नाम सुना है इनका? Yeah. अच्छा, so this was in the news very recently. They were the ones who created the first mass-produced tetanus vaccine. बड़ी पुरानी company है, really large medical company still. रिसेंटली जब ट्विटर मैंने कहा कि आप ब्लू टिक मार्क ले सकते हैं, चेक मार्क ले सकते हैं $8 में. अच्छा, उससे पहले व्हाट वाज द ब्लू चेक मार्क, व्हाट डिड इट सिग्निफाई? कि अगर किसी के नाम ट्विटर नाम के आगे ब्लू चेक मार्क है, व्हाट डज दैट मीन? देयर वाज अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ एसेंशियली अगेन देयर वाज अ क्रिएटेड सम सॉर्ट ऑफ फेथ अराउंड इट कि यार ये सही बात कर रहा होगा क्योंकि इसके आगे टिक लगा हुआ है, इस पर नहीं ट्रस्ट करना, मे बी इस पर टिक नहीं लगा हुआ. सो व्हाट हैपेंड वाज ट्विटर सेड कि आप $8 में कोई भी अपने नाम के साथ ये ब्लू चेक मार्क लगवा सकता है. So a lot of troll accounts were created, obviously. One of them was this account called Eli Lilly and Co. ये actual company का Twitter handle नहीं था, किसी ने troll ने बनाया, very similar to their actual Twitter handle, and they tweeted out, "We are excited to announce insulin is free now." Insulin is very very expensive in the US, और बहुत पैसे बनाते हैं ये company through selling insulin. उन्होंने ये tweet की, within an hour, the company lost $30 billion in market value. क्योंकि उनके इन्वेस्टर्स ने कहा कि ये तो फ्री बेचेंगे अपनी सबसे बड़ी प्रोडक्ट. तो बेसिकली दैट वन फेक ट्वीट, बिकॉज इट हैड दैट चेक मार्क विच वी हैड सम एसोसिएशंस विद, क्योंकि चेक मार्क देखा ऑथेंटिक है. अगर मैंने अपनी चेक मार्क के बगैर रैंडमली ये अकाउंट बनाया होता और ट्वीट की होती, किसी को कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ना था. बट दैट चेक मार्क इज वॉट वी पुट ऑल आवर सॉर्ट ऑफ फेथ और ट्रस्ट इन, एंड दैट वाज मिसयूज्ड बाय, और आई थिंक वेरी वेल यूज्ड बाय हूएवर मेड दिस. और वो एक एलाई लिली को बिलियंस का नुकसान हो गया. किसी को यहाँ बैक पेन का कोई इशू होता है कभी? ये सारे डिज़ाइनर बैठे हुए ना. सो लेट्स से आपको बैक पेन हुई, किसी ने आपको कहा कि यार ये पेनाडोल ले लो, या किसी ने कहा कि यार ये मसल रिलैक्सेंट है, ये ले लो. विच डू यू जनरली क्विक टेक विदाउट क्वेश्चनिंग एज मच? ठीक है, पेनाडोल मे बी मसल रिलैक्सेंट इफ यू न्यू कौन सा है, बट देयर इज अ लेवल ऑफ सॉर्ट ऑफ, एटलीस्ट फॉर मी, मुझे जब कोई भी आई हैड क्वाइट अ फ्यू बैक प्रॉब्लम्स हुई पोस्चर की वजह से सारा, तो मसल रिलैक्सेंस के ऊपर आई वुड डू लाइक अ होल काइंड ऑफ रिसर्च ऑन कि ये क्या होता है, इससे ये मसला तो नहीं हो जाएगा, वो तो नहीं हो जाएगा. बट देन समबडी गिव्स मी लाइक अ पेन किलर फॉर हेडेक, आई एम लाइक बस दे दो, मेरे सर में दर्द हो रही है. बट देयर इज लाइक अ पर्सनल सॉर्ट ऑफ बायस टुवर्ड्स वन ओवर द अदर. आई seem to pay a lot more attention to the potential negatives of one, not as much to the other. Again, personally different हो सकता है लोगों का. Coming back to the planes that we talked about. कितने लोग जब जहाज़ में बैठते हैं, इवन दो ट्रस्ट करते हैं, कम से कम डूम्सडे सिनेरियो अपने दिमाग में चलाते ज़रूर हैं. क्वाइट अ फ्यू. कौन है जिन्होंने कभी ना कभी चलाया है डूम्सडे, या अ फ्यू टाइम्स के यार अगर कुछ हो गया, मसला क्रैश हो गया तो क्या होगा? आधे लोग हैं इधर मेरे टाइप के. So yeah, so this is something that I think is fairly common. You at least imagine that this could go down, there could be something that goes wrong. How many people do this when they get into a car? काफ़ी negative energy है इस रूम में. Nice. So yeah, so half of the plane वाले scenario. Which do you think statistically is more dangerous? A car ride or a plane ride? A car. By far. Like by अगर आप per mile देख लें, per journey, तो obviously even per mile, which was the surprising stat for me, because planes obviously can fly a lot more, but even if you just do the per mile calculation of my death rate, way higher for cars than planes. Cars even higher than small planes. तो small planes के लिए हम लोग generally सोचेंगे कि यार बड़ा dangerous है, गाड़ी में हम आराम से बैठेंगे, कोई मसला नहीं है. So again, I don't know कि इसकी क्या reasons हैं, हर किसी की अपनी हो सकती हैं, but it's an interesting thing to think about कि the facts of it shouldn't really align with what we do, but none of us are going to change our mind कि अगली बार जहाज़ में बैठ के ये नहीं होगा कि नहीं बड़ा safe है, गाड़ी में बैठ के भी shouldn't be panicking, but somehow there's a disconnection between the reality of things versus what we perceive. So we've talked about this a little bit, maybe there's an institution or some experts that have shown कि यार वो experts हैं. When we saw the PIA Blue versus some nondescript airline, हमें पता भी नहीं है कौन सी है, we somehow trust it more. So there's clearly that ability to earn trust जो आप कर सकते हैं. किस तरह होता है earn trust? So sort of good results over time, being consistent with those results. Consistency का actually बड़ा interesting एक ये है कि if you look at, I've worked a little bit on पहले a few years ago on childhood vaccination drives, and one of the things that's really important is consistency of message. अगर आप लोग एक साल जाते हैं पोलियो की वैक्सीन्स करने और आप कहते हैं कि इसके कोई साइड इफेक्ट्स नहीं है और फिर साइड इफेक्ट होता है, that's way worse. But if you say side effects हैं, people might also freak out. But over time, if you're providing consistent messaging, that community will over time just know कि यार इनको पता है क्या कर रहे हैं. And that's अगर वो inconsistent messaging होगी, that becomes like a big problem in terms of trust. So that clearly becomes an important part. इसमें designers का क्या role है इस सारे earning faith या earning trust वाली बात जो हो रही है? Has anyone designed a financial app here जिस पे कोई पैसे transact हो रहे हैं? Fine. Quite a few people. अब उस पर लेट्स से आपने कॉमिक सैंस इस्तेमाल किया हुआ है वर्सेस मे बी कोई सेरिफ फॉन्ट इस्तेमाल किया हुआ है, कोई फ़र्क पड़ेगा ट्रस्ट में? बॉय बात तो वही हो रही है. मे बी दैट माइट बी बिकॉज लोगों की एसोसिएशंस हैं विद द थिंग दैट यूर यूजिंग, राइट? सो समथिंग एज सिंपल एज द एलिमेंट दैट यूर यूजिंग दैट कॉन्ट्रीब्यूट्स टू कि ऐप में ट्रस्ट है कि नहीं. अगर वो ऐप किसी बैंक की है, दैट माइट गेट एसोसिएटेड विद कि बैंक ही फ्रॉड है, ये कॉमिक सैंस इस्तेमाल करते हैं, राइट? सो द बैंक ने कुछ नहीं किया, पर वो एक डिज़ाइनर ने फॉन्ट इस्तेमाल डिफरेंट कर लिया था. सडनली दैट इंस्टीट्यूशन माइट बी लेस ट्रस्टेड देन इट वाज बिफोर, राइट? सो देयर इज ऑल्सो दिस वियर्ड रिलेशनशिप वेयर देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ पावर इन द एलिमेंट्स दैट वी क्रिएट. वो विजुअल एलिमेंट्स क्या होते हैं और उनसे लोगों की क्या रिलेशन है, वो इवेंचुअली जो बड़ी चीज़ है, वेदर वो एक ऐप है, प्रोडक्ट है, जो भी है, उस पर रिफ्लेक्ट करती है. सो सिमिलरली लाइक फॉर इंस्टेंस मैसेजिंग में वो वैक्सीन जो हैं वो उनकी लेबलिंग किस तरह की होती है, वो किस तरह sort of visual effect they give or how you perceive them might have an effect on what you believe about the science of it or about the efficacy of them. अच्छा, we've been talking about faith in different ways and trust and confidence. कोई faith का relation है with like countries and flags and messages around countries? क्या होता है? Does this change at all जब पाकिस्तान इंडिया का मैच होता है? क्या होता है तब? ज़्यादा फेथ हो जाता है ना? क्यों? श्योर, यस, ग्रेट कॉन्सेप्ट. क्या होता है लाइक पाकिस्तान ने तो कोई चेंज नहीं किया, बस एक मैच हुआ है, आईसीसी ने स्केड्यूल किया है, सडनली एवरीवनस लाइक वील वेयर ग्रीन एंड फीलिंग वेरी पाकिस्तानी. वो कहाँ आता है? हाउ डज दैट वर्क? नेशनलिज्म, श्योर, पीपल माइट, कॉम्पिटिशन, यस. सॉरी, बॉर्डर पे पहुँच जाते हैं, बिल्कुल सही है.
क्योंकि हमारी आइडेंटिटी एज पाकिस्तानी इज इनहेरेंटली बिकॉज ऑफ इंडिया.
Sure.
इंडिया ना होता तो पाकिस्तान ना होता.
Sure.
So I think in this case the
Right.
product comes out that.
For sure. So it sort of highlights your identity more than a regular day, right? आप हम लोग सारे अपनी jobs पे जा रहे हैं, वो we probably don't think of our like identity as being our country in any way. It's not a topic that comes up. As soon as that's put in front of our faces, we think about it a lot more. वो patriotic रूह जाग जाती है सारी. So that's sort of like clearly that there's an element where the facts haven't really changed, but our sort of faith in something or how passionately we feel about something changes based on something completely different and maybe historical. अच्छा, अब हम faith की थोड़ी सी उस element में बात करते हैं where it's often referred to, and I think initially when I asked somebody just said a set of beliefs that you live by, which is often how we think of like faith traditions, which might be called religions or that sort of dimension of faith. इसके अंदर रिलीजन की जब बात होती है या फेथ ट्रेडिशंस की बात होती है, इसमें डिज़ाइनर्स का क्या रोल होता है और थ्रू आउट हिस्ट्री रहा है? इज देयर एनी रोल दैट डिज़ाइनर्स हैव प्लेड?
प्लेसेस ऑफ वर्शिप जो बनाई है, डिज़ाइनर डॉट रोल के अंदर.
या सो दीज आर एग्जांपल्स फ्रॉम लाइक प्लेसेस ऑफ वर्शिप. उनका डिज़ाइन जो है दैट माइट इंस्पायर योर फेथ, इट माइट हेल्प यू सॉर्ट ऑफ मेक योर फेथ मोर कॉन्क्रीट, व्हाटएवर दैट मे बी. एनीथिंग एल्स? Sure, yeah, for sure. Symbolism is very important in this. So वो उसमें visual culture का connection with faith आ जाता है और वो designers उसमें obviously बहुत important role play करते हैं. Anything else?
Displaying your own faith.
Sure, yeah. So there could be the way somebody is dressed, the symbols that they have on might say a lot about them without them telling you all of that. Sure. और उसमें वो एक तरह से symbols में हम क्या power देते हैं या symbols के साथ क्या association देते हैं, that's what people are using, right? So ये कुछ examples हैं, again ceilings from different places, but we'll get to this in a lot more depth. अब एक तरह से हमने देख लिया, बात की फेथ ट्रेडिशंस की, उसमें क्लियरली रोल है. पहले मैंने पाकिस्तान इंडिया की बात की, पर जनरली नेशंस की बात की. इज देयर एन ओवरलैप विद हाउ डिज़ाइन वर्क्स इन दीज डिफरेंट realms? कोई आज तक किसी नेशनल म्यूजियम गया है? Could there be some similarity between how that's designed versus maybe a place of worship is? क्या similarities हो सकती हैं या क्या चीज़ें हैं जो overlap हो सकती हैं?
I think कि जिस तरह हमारे पास इस्लामिक डिज़ाइन हैं,
जी.
वो क्रिश्चियंस के डिज़ाइन के और ज्यूज के डिज़ाइन से डिफरेंट हैं. It is somewhat synonymous to हमारा जो फ्लैग है वो डिफरेंट है इंडिया या दूसरे
Sure,
मुल्कों से.
sure. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. वो I think पहले भी हुआ था कि the colors in our flag represent something that might have something to do with faith. और उसी तरह that's again visual, क्या visuals हम उस पर डाल रहे हैं, that says something. Somebody said पहले religion के case में what you wear, for instance, अगर आपने चांद तारा पहना होगा, that says something. You're using symbology to say more about yourself than might be obvious. या आप बता नहीं रहे, बस पहना हुआ है, आप किसी को कुछ पता चल जाता है. Similarly, अगर आपने क्रॉस पहना हुआ है, वो क्रॉस क्रूसिफिक्स है या किसी और किस्म का क्रॉस है, that says more about your faith. तो ये सारी चीज़ें वो हैं that where I think these things overlap. There's also other faith traditions that you might think about. किसी ने इसका नाम सुना है? Right, left पे जो है. So this often ये Scientology is one, but people might there are other examples of newer faiths. उनके जो faith के believers हैं, they clearly believe as much as somebody else, right? So इसमें but there's an element where outsiders often seem to have more care talking about one faith over another. It's not always equal, right? The way somebody might be able to talk about Scientology might not be the same as Islam or Judaism or Christianity or so on, or there's some spectrum going on. So इसमें भी there might be a role that we talk about. इसमें I think the discussions we've had earlier where it's like कि कितना time हो चुका है किसी चीज़ को, clearly there's an element of that. अगर कोई आपको कहता है जी मैं एक religion में believe करता हूँ और ये 6 साल पुराना है versus 4,000 साल पुराना है, you probably pay different kind of attention to what they're saying, even though technically आपने study नहीं किया वो क्या कह रहे हैं. But similar things to what we spoke about earlier, वो chair हो जाए चाहे airplane हो जाए, there seems to be some element of how long something has been around and in terms of how much faith we're willing to give it. अच्छा, इसमें now we'll go deeper into the design of faith traditions. Let's guess top left पे जो है, what religion or what area does that belong to? Christianity? Anything specific within? Sure. Anything specific? कोई can you think of like anything subsect within Christianity या बस generally Christianity कह रहे हैं? Sure. Okay, this is a Russian Orthodox Church. A lot of overlap with Catholic symbolism. So similar stories चल रही हैं. Right, top right. Bottom right. ये जो उस साइड पे ब्लू वाला है मॉस्क, और उसके ऊपर वाला भी मॉस्क था. So, नीचे वाला सिनेगॉग है, ऊपर वाला सिनेगॉग है. Russian Orthodox synagogue mosque. So quite a few people thought the synagogue was a mosque. Some people thought the mosque was like confused. थोड़ा पहले पता नहीं चल रहा था. ये वाला क्या है? It's a museum, but uses similar sort of architecture. क्यों? Why might that be? Why would a museum use somewhat similar architecture to other faith-based places?
Because museum holds history, so it has the architectural significance.
For sure. So it might, which might reflect in a way where the feelings that a museum creator wants to elicit in you might be similar. कि यार आप आएँ, आप respect करें इस जगह की. You might feel like कि कुछ चीज़ important है या हम historical जगह पे खड़ा हूँ. And that might be where we're using sort of what people's perception is in all of these spaces. Whether वो किसी religion की हैं, वो भी इतना उसमें भी काफ़ी overlap है और religion की नहीं भी हैं, पर feeling similar है. So it's about like आप एक इंसान को कैसे affect कर रहे हैं, which is how a lot of design works, right? You try to figure out what's the thing you want the person to do, उसके हिसाब से कुछ design करें. Yeah, and for similar reasons, they lend very well to the other thing because जो आप इंसान को वहाँ feel कराना चाह रहे हैं, there's a lot of overlap in that. What religion would this be from? Sure, yes. This?
Islam.
Yes. Judaism.
Taoism.
Shinto, yes. I was like, मैं सोच रहा था जो इसको guess कर लेगा 5 points for your whatever your house is. So this is a Shinto temple in not Tokyo, somewhere in Japan. I'll remember. So Church of Light, Osaka, Japan, Mosque of Muhammad Abdul Khalik, Dubai, and Ohel Jacob Synagogue, Munich, Germany, and then that's Kyoto. Kyoto में एक Shinto. These are very very old arches. शायद आपने एक आर्च की तस्वीर देखी हो ऑरेंज कलर की, वो पानी में अक्सर जापान की रिप्रेजेंटेशन बनती है. दैट्स आल्सो शिंटो आर्च सिमिलर टू दिस. अच्छा, ये अगर आपको मैं 2 तस्वीरें दिखाऊं, लेफ़्ट पे एक चर्च है और राइट पे एक मॉस्क है. व्हाट वुड यू बी एबल टू टेल मी अबाउट द बिलीफ सिस्टम्स ऑफ दीज 2 रिलीजन्स जस्ट लुकिंग एट व्हाट दिस इज? श्योर. So there's monotheistic religions के circle हैं, तो आप monotheistic religion की बात कर रहे हैं. Sure. Anything else? Is there anything to do with कि ये ऊपर है? उसका क्या मतलब हो सकता है? Sure. क्या उसका what's the faith? Sure, yeah. God and the heavens are above. ये faith traditions का दोनों का part है. That which isn't true for all religions in the world. शायद most people in this room would automatically think of it that way just because of the place we've grown up with, जहाँ ये बहुत common है. हर faith tradition through history में ये नहीं रहा, पर clearly you look up, ऊपर एक awe की feeling आनी चाहिए आपको. Makes a lot of sense. अच्छा, you mentioned कि एक जगह पे characters जो हैं या वो characters दिखाए जा रहे हैं, उनकी तस्वीरें दिखाई जा रही हैं. Anything else specific that you can see here? Maybe in terms of the characters या जितना भी नज़र आ रहा है. चलिए स्पेसिफिक नहीं भी है तो आई कैन से कि लेट्स से कि ये 12 फिगर्स इसके अराउंड है सेंटर सर्कल के. व्हाट माइट दैट मीन? 12 apostles हैं ये. दैट्स अ बिग पार्ट ऑफ द बिलीफ सिस्टम. सो वो सिंबल आपको नज़र आ रहा है. सब किसी ने आई थिंक वननेस वाली बात की थी बीच में. दिस ऑल्सो अ डव विच हैज़ व्हाट सिम्बोलॉजी? होली स्पिरिट. तो होली स्पिरिट इज एट द सेंटर, सबसे ऊपर. Everything leading up to the Holy Spirit in the middle, that sort of like encapsulates how the belief system works, right? Now just looking at this, any similarities with that?
Yeah, so Allah is placed.
Yeah.
So very similar.
Yeah, so similar theme, monotheistic, deity in the middle, सारा कुछ उधर lead हो रहा है, सबसे ऊपर वो उनकी representation है, and all of the arches, everything sort of just leading up, but also saying something on the way about the belief system. थोड़ी सी यहाँ डिफरेंट चीज़ें लिखी हुई हैं, उधर बनी हुई थी. एंड दैट्स बिकॉज वन फेथ इनकरेजेस रिप्रेजेंटेशन, वन डजंट. सो देयर इज डिफरेंट वेज ऑफ सेइंग द सेम थिंग कि हम अपनी स्टोरीज बता रहे हैं, अपना बिलीफ बता रहे हैं, ऑल ऑफ इट लीडिंग टू दिस थिंग दैट वी बिलीव इन. ये किस डज दिस लुक एनीथिंग सिमिलर? ये किस फेथ का है आपके ख्याल में? Somebody said Buddhist, somebody said Hindu. Anything else? Zoroastrian. चलें हम इस पे आ जाते हैं अभी. But do you see any similarities? Okay. ठीक है, अब इस पे we'll go into detail. उसी जगह का एक पार्ट ये भी है. Does this say anything more? इधर कुछ पता चल रहा है? It's a temple. Yes. Cambodian नहीं है ये, but you're on the right lines. So let's go here. Does anyone know what this place is? Angkor Wat, Siem Reap में, Cambodia में. One of the oldest Hindu temples, well, not one of the oldest, but one of the most famous Hindu temples. I've been here almost at this, इससे थोड़ा सा साइड पे जब सनसेट होता है इसके पीछे, it's an amazing sight. आपको सारा पता चलता है कि why this place has been around for 1,000 or so years, why people would believe in this place being holy for them, right? Because of that experience जो आपको वहाँ मिल रहा है. Probably इस चीज़ से आपको थोड़ा अंदाज़ा हो सकता है कि वो क्या, in terms of what you feel, why might that be very universal. So Angkor Wat है कैम्बोडिया में, ये हिंदू टेम्पल है. इसमें ये काफ़ी कॉमन सॉर्ट ऑफ थीम्स हैं कि ये लेवल्स हैं, इस तरह के ऊपर मीनार टाइप चीज़ें जा रही हैं. Any ideas why this sort of, what the symbology of stuff like this might be? Or I might give you an example of ये उसी तरह का आर्किटेक्चर इंडिया में भी है, एक और सिमिलर एरा के हिंदू टेम्पल में. Any ideas why वो guess कर लें symbology क्या हो सकती है?
Reaching up to the sky.
Yeah.
Where no one is.
Converging, reaching up to the sky.
hierarchy की दिखा रहा है शायद.
Sure. there's a hierarchy reaching up to the sky. अच्छा, these are just like some again pictures of ये दो different temples की हैं, but very similar themes going on. इसमें थोड़ी सी detail भी आपको नीचे नज़र आ रही है. What just thinking of visuals now, क्या visual elements हैं? Faith छोड़ दें, belief छोड़ दें. What are the visual elements that you're seeing here? They seem very old.
More intricate pattern.
Intricate हैं. And patterns हैं, maybe repeat हो रहे हैं. Lot of triangles. Anything else? किसी ने पहले कहा था hierarchy वाला repeat हो रही है चीज़ें.
There's a lot of symmetry to all of it as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of symmetry for sure. ठीक है, इसमें ना कुछ चीज़ें हैं that are very obviously बहुत symbology होती है हर religious building में, so I can't possibly go into or don't even know half of it probably. But one of the things is कि ये जो आपको इस तरह के नज़र आ रहे हैं structures, these are supposed to represent एक belief है in a holy mountain जिसके ऊपर the deities live. So it's a representation of the holy mountain. वो peak पे जाता है, that peak is the one sort of where the main deity or representative of the main deity. So it's again, it's looking up, top पे जो है there's a oneness that's connecting everything and there's a level to get there. एक और बड़ा interesting इसमें element ये है which you might see here as well. अच्छा, वो मैंने ऊपर जाते हुए चीज़ें दिखा दी. इसमें अब it's a very different structure, but कुछ similarities हैं just in terms of the visual or geometric styles. So इसमें एक interesting element ये है कि there's a belief, again Hinduism is a very diverse religion, but generally the mainstream Hindu sort of belief around the universe is कि कोई एक timeline नहीं है. The universe is created, it ends, it gets created again, and it's a cyclical universe. और वो जो multiverse वगैरह के ऊपर बात होती है, there's a lot of interesting relations with that, inspired by discussions inspired by sort of these beliefs. और उसका एक element core ये है कि there's a smaller universe, उसके ऊपर एक बड़ी universe है, उसके ऊपर एक और बड़ी universe है, and everything repeats in the creation of the universe, in the timelines. और इसका एक sort of जो worldly version है, वो जो गंगा river है, जिसको I think everyone would know कि वो Hinduism में बहुत important है. One of the things that people believe is कि ये reflection है of a celestial river, जो कि up in the skies है, ये उसका reflection है. और वो reflection क्या है? उस जो celestial river है, उसका एक reflection आप देखते हैं जो हम Milky Way कहते हैं. So that's a reflection, and then this is a reflection of the Milky Way. So you can see a belief in छोटी चीज़ है, वो बड़ी हो रही है, उसका एक और बड़ा version है, and there's a repetition involved, and there's a hierarchy involved. Does that make sense? And does this make sense now? So there's a lot of that repeating patterns, tessellation stuff that you again can connect to the faith. Fractals पता है क्या होते हैं? क्या होते हैं?
There is one particular shape that keeps either opening up into the same shape
Yeah.
or like closing.
Yeah, so it's the same shape, a complicated pattern in mathematics built from simple repeated shapes that are reduced in size every time they are repeated. And that's essentially very close to the Hindu belief in how the universe works. वो repeat हो रही है एक दूसरे के अंदर, and now you see the architecture is very very representative of that at all levels. There'll be वो patterns ने बात की, there's a lot of geometry, वो सारा repeat हो जा रहा है. And this is a Hindu temple. ये अब थोड़ा ज़्यादा शायद obvious हो जाए at the detail, but at this level this seemed like any other sort of and monotheistic religions that we were talking about earlier, because still the belief system kind of all leads to a very similar belief even in a religion like Hinduism. So ये उसका zoom in version है, इसमें you probably would have guessed really quickly कि कहाँ से है ये. Where is this from? Or what religion, faith?
Islam.
Yeah. Yes. Do you see any similarities in the visual language?
Yeah.
क्या हो रहा है यहाँ?
Pattern repeats.
Repeating patterns हो रहे हैं, कोई fractal type चीज़ें चल रही हैं, सही है. और वो पहले जो बात की थी, एक तरह से उससे middle में जा रहे हैं. There's a connection in the middle where everything is coming out of. कोई बड़े patterns हैं, they're going into a smaller pattern and so on. There's a lot of similarity. This is a mosque in Isfahan, Iran. This is not a mosque, a tomb, but very different sort of, each visual element might be very different, but interestingly similar themes going on. सारा कुछ middle में जा रहा है. This is also in the middle of the inside है एक dome की. अच्छा, domes जो हैं इस तरह के जो आते हैं, हमने पहले भी काफ़ी सारे देखे, ये बहुत ज़्यादा common है, especially in monotheistic religions. उसकी क्या reason होगी? We've talked about कि वो center circle वगैरह, but why is it this sort of shape? अच्छा, उसकी एक reason ये वो मानी जाती है through history कि the way a lot of the holy books talk about the sky is in the form of a shell over us, right? वो again poetic language है, we can have like literal interpretation, some people will have poetic interpretations, but the idea है कि आप नीचे हैं और आसमान ऊपर है जो आपके ऊपर एक तरह से वो पड़ा हुआ है, right? That sort of a representation जिसकी वजह से middle में there will be a convergence and a reference to God, and that's sort of like the representation essentially हमारी आपकी religious cosmology की जो है वो हो जाती है in domes के अंदर. Again, another example from a mosque in Iran. This is another, I think, gorgeous, like breathtaking arrangement from a building in Iran. There's a lot of very, very interesting fractal geometry going on here, or just like it's kind of a computer rendered लगता है, to think कि centuries पहले किसी ने बनाया है is all very, very amazing. You see कि एक और इसके side पे, other side of the hall. How does everyone feel? So one of the reasons I put this here was कि वो जो सारी logic of having all of this up in these religious places is the same. When you look up, it's a very human thing to feel a certain way, looking at the night sky, at the sky, stars, Milky Way, and it replicates some of those feelings when you're in those buildings, especially when you also have some faith already leaning you into that building. But also in my experience, I've visited a lot of great cathedrals, a lot of जो temple tha, and a few other places. I think a lot of the same feelings come out because the way they're connecting to you are very similar. Again, you might lean a certain way based on what you came in with in terms of belief. So we've talked about some of the same fractal kind of geometry gets repeated here. लेकिन हमारा वो जो इसके the people who created this probably didn't have the same sort of cyclical universe वाली belief, right? जो Hinduism में था. So why might there be very similar patterns that emerge here as well? And one of the interesting parts here is why you see a lot of great geometry in throughout Islamic history in architecture, उसका faith से क्या ताल्लुक होगा? Like just think of geometry, faith, क्या ताल्लुक हो सकता है? It is basically the belief in the underlying symmetry of things. There's an underlying order. ऊपर जितना मर्जी chaos हो दुनिया में, there's a belief in the religion in an underlying order. कि सारा कुछ there's a pattern, there's a reason for why things happen. The way for that to be sort of shown in artists' work or designers' work, because you can't show images, the best way to show it is through geometry, math, which has a very similar structure के ऊपर बहुत चीज़ें complicated हो रही हैं, नीचे there might be a very simple formula that runs all of it. Fractals का actually जो formula है, it's a very simple one, 1980s में एक mathematician ने discover किया था. It's a very simple formula, you write that, you can turn anything into a fractal. So that's a very core example, even though वो ये structures हज़ारों साल पहले बने हैं, but that basic thing about आगे complexity है, base पे एक simple चीज़ है. And that's what throughout Islamic history, architects and designers have represented through using patterns and stuff of this sort. What do you think these cultures over time might produce if they have एक side पे वो beliefs in fractals, वो repeating nature, एक side पे belief in their underlying order? Maybe stuff like this. A lot of very, very important mathematical developments through history have been either in the Islamic world or India, which was very inspired often, obviously, by Hinduism. And sort of, so knowing some of the history, this makes a lot of sense. अगर आप artist हैं, या आप कोई किसी भी field में हैं, you want to express your belief in a certain way, in a certain religion, you might have the ability to make paintings, which we see amazing artwork throughout Christian history. अगर आपके पास वो इतनी ability नहीं है, या that's not the main focus, you're going to express it in other ways, which we've talked about in certain, and that might contribute to some of this. Some people might not be happy कि पढ़ने पड़ते थे स्कूल में ये, but this has helped a lot, move the world on a lot though. So, what came first? ये math सारा या ये amazing architecture जो हमने देखा है, patterns और ये सारी चीज़ें? I actually don't know. I think a lot of this is sort of a conversation between the two, right? अगर आप एक चीज़ बनाते हैं, one of the interesting things about Islamic sort of geometric patterns is कि you can create almost all of them with a compass and a ruler. तो वो एक बार आप वो figure out कर लेना कि आपने compass बना के 3 या लाइनें draw करनी है, 4 करनी है, and 2 circles overlap कैसे होंगे? Pretty much all the patterns we've seen here can get repeated through that simple construction. And I can imagine that becoming a very conversational thing. कि वो करके आप आगे जाते हैं, you make something, to figure that out, you need to figure some other geometry out. And that's sort of like over time. And I couldn't find a good answer of like, कि कोई पहले आया था. It seems like a conversation between building things, learning from them, building on the math and so on. And probably the faith sort of that inspired both of those at the same time. So we've seen quite a few examples from all of these different places, different kinds of examples of faith in design or religion in design. ये 11th century का temple था जो इंडिया में that I showed you some details of. ये जो Shinto temple है, this is from the 8th century, 1300 years ago. This is from 1999. Tadao Ando is a Japanese-American architect जिसने ये बनाया था. I love his architecture if you want to look at more of his very simple sort of forms, but still he managed to sort of communicate वो जो grandiose nature of spaces होती है ना कि you feel awe, but it's a very simple space. That's his sort of mastery. So how have these sort of patterns that we've seen जो कि बड़े similar हैं across different regions, across different religions, they've worked for over 1,000 years clearly, right? How? Why have they worked? The way these have been built haven't really changed across history. I think that's probably why. We might have iPhones now, we didn't have them 1,000 years ago, and so on. But what somebody in the 8th century felt looking up at the Milky Way is probably very similar to what you or I would feel if we ever managed to see it outside one of our cities. But that feeling doesn't change, right? So the way people perceive things doesn't really change. At least at this level, obviously छोटी मोटी चीज़ें जो हम डिज़ाइन कर रहे होते हैं apps वगैरह वो और बात है. But at a very basic human level, emotional level, humans don't really change. And these faiths, as well as the people who design for them, understand people at a very core level, obviously. And in a way, it's 1,000+ years of user testing. Something has been around for 1,000 years. It will probably work again in 2024 if I make another mosque. I should probably learn from something that's been working for 1,000 years. No need to design it again. And the purpose seems to be that sort of very, that's been a theme, is designing for peace, joy, and awe. Awe is that feeling of thinking of something in sort of bigger than yourself, having that feeling. Or वो काफ़ी similar है in all of these things that we've studied. And for faith. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions?
My question is, do you think if a designer is asked to create a mosque, let's say in this time right now, he or she would design something exactly what has been built 1,000 years ago? Do you think that's going to be similar, same, or different?
No, so it would likely end up being very different, right? A lot of reasons for it: different materials, different resources. You're probably not a king who has thousands of slaves to build things, very frankly.
Sure.
Like वो again हम Mughal architecture देखते हैं, people are like ऐसी buildings आप नहीं बनती. You're like, you probably don't want them built. There's a reason why those were built. But the idea where there would be a lot of similarities probably in a mosque or any religious place that people feel a certain way about would be that very similar things. जहाँ के बहुत बड़ी होगी probably. There'll be high ceilings. There's that dome, right? These associations, those will probably not change. How that's built will probably change. Machinery change हो गई है, mechanics सारी change हो गई हैं, what materials you can use, budget वगैरह. But for that mosque to sort of be, again, छोटी मस्जिदें भी होती हैं, छोटी religious places भी होती हैं, but उनका purpose probably वो नहीं होता कि joy और awe वाला जो है, उनका है वो functional है, right? But if you're designing for the same reasons that these mosques were designed for 1,000 years ago, you're probably going to learn a lot from them and want to replicate as many as possible. There's also even very interesting sort of symbology behind arches क्यों होती हैं, उसका relation to वो scriptures, probably not going into them. आज अगर कोई वो design करेगा, they probably don't need to know the scriptural sort of reasons for it, but they clearly see कि यार ये हर जगह होती हैं, there's a reason ये होती हैं, and this is what people expect, I'll build this way as well. So there'll probably be a lot of continuity still in what it ends up being.
And the thing that you said, the element of awe,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that has changed now? Because now if something is more minimalistic,
Mm-hmm.
more simplistic,
Mm-hmm.
not a dome, perhaps
Yeah.
just a cube,
Yeah.
let's say, that awes people too. Right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Do you think that would, sort of guide
Mm-hmm.
the design elements or not? Because
Yeah.
that's the awe that we are talking about, right? The dome,
Yeah.
the experience that the Has that changed or not?
Yeah, I would say that could definitely. So we talked about pehle with different examples which are outside talking about religion, around, for instance, time. It was clear in all the examples that something that's been around for a long time, people have more respect for, and sort of you have associations of trust and faith with them. So I think that's definitely still going to be a thing. Even if I replicate, let's say, a mosque from 500 years ago exactly to the dot, लेकिन वो आज बना के मैं बहरिया टाउन में बना दूँ, तो probably not going to elicit the exact same emotions, right? So that's something that I probably can't replicate. It will take that time. It will take that sort of the fact कि उस जगह पे thousands of worshippers a day for 500 years have sort of put their faith in. That helps build that awe wali feeling in that, right? So there's a definite time element. Uske again, in terms of जब कहीं think whether it's a straight line or a dome, I think probably has less sort of universal effect because लोगों की priorities भी different होती हैं ना. That church that I really like the design of, वो जो टेरा विंडो की थी, a lot of people will just be like ये क्या डब्बा है, right? In terms of architecture, right? Similarly, other people might say कि यार you don't need to make mosques as big anymore. हमारे पास resources नहीं हैं. Valid argument, right? So all of that is, I think, it doesn't really have. So all of those are factors that designers should know, and we should sort of figure out कि उन resources के अंदर how can we replicate as much of that feeling that we want. वो probably कभी वो replicate नहीं होगी जो 500 साल पुरानी mosque में होगी, but we can try learning from it and doing it in the resources and the time and the context that we are in.
You were just talking that the iconography becomes associated with a certain religion, right? So you're saying that if you build a mosque at this point, it will have a dome. I was thinking that you see Eid posts, Ramzan posts, so you'll see a person offering the prayer. That's going to be there. So do you think that would change over time? Of course, you can't answer that. It's just a thought that I was thinking that we can change the iconography of religion over time. It's been there for centuries, of course, for a reason.
Here, so it does change over time because this becomes like a bit of a different topic. But a lot of the examples that I showed through different religions were very sort of representative of the mainstream of those religions, right? So even within, for instance, the very diverse Islamic faith, different sects have very different visual cues in their places of worship. So without naming any sects, you can look up like how different sects within Islam even represent their faith in their buildings, and that changes quite a lot. So वो तो already हो रहा है. So over time, let's say some of those sects, which happens throughout history, some sects become the mainstream, another becomes mainstream. That happens over time. Still, the mosques in North Africa look very different from the mosques in Middle East to Pakistan. तो वो already हो रहा होगा. There are elements that will probably always be very similar, like or repeated. But over time, for sure, like how the faith transitions over time will be shown, I think, in the representation. Which again, this is not a prediction. This, अगर history को ले लें, that's sort of how different eras within religious architecture have gone.
कुछ मैंने mosque ऐसी देखी पाकिस्तान से बाहर, क्योंकि मैं पाकिस्तान रहा था तो मुझे एक perception
बिल्कुल
इस तरह की mosque
ऐसे ही हो जी.
तो मुझे तब थोड़ा सा अंदाजा हुआ कि ये बड़ा मैटर कर रहा होता है कि काम कमीशन किसको हुआ है. So
right.
I saw some mosques जैसे हाईवे पे mosques होती हैं
जी.
सऊदीया
जी.
जो कि बिल्कुल ही एक्सपेक्टेशन ब्रेक कर रही थी मेरी. नो
right. बिल्कुल.
नो बहुत मिनिमल, शायद पूरे 4 दीवारों पे एक जगह ला ला ला
right. right.
So वो मुझे काफी अच्छा उधर जाके फील हुआ कि
right.
सिंबोलॉजी हमने यूज भी किया लेकिन in a new perspective.
बिल्कुल. I think that's where the जो we've sort of talked about a lot of this history, and we've also talked about कि लोग आते हैं और वो क्या करते हैं, वो सारी चीज़ ना. It's sort of, at least I think of a lot of especially older, चाहे वो religious places हो नहीं हो, older structures as being almost like living things, not in a literal sense, but living as in कि उनकी एक life trajectory है that they've gone through, right? Or it tells you something about the people that live there. अगर आप ये जो Central Asia में mosques देखें, they'll be designed a certain way. वहाँ बहुत ठंड होती है. They probably can't have the same materials that we have here, right? So that over time will tell you something about not just the place, but the way people pray there. Praying with your shoes on is much more accepted, which wouldn't be a thing you see in Pakistan. That's reflected in the architecture. That's now part of their faith. Over time, it's technically the same faith, but the way it manifests itself is different, and that's reflective in the architecture. Or over time, obviously, climate change हो सकता है हमारे यहाँ भी 100 साल बाद वो होना पड़े. But again, that's like a living being in that story kind of way.
Like being a designer, when you go, like when you travel and go to places, do you like put that design element in like everything you see? कि like हर एक जो भी आप देखें उसमें आप कुछ ना कुछ सोचें कि
I think वो वो मेरे हाथ से बाहर है. I don't think I can turn that part of my brain on. But that's, I think,
I just like kind of connecting design to everything. इसकी मुझे क्या उसमें यूज एक्सपीरियंस सोचा होगा या क्या उसका factors है.
unfortunately somewhat yes. I again वो जो पहले मैं कह रहा था कि ये नहीं है कि मैं Angkor Wat गया या अभी थोड़ी देर पहले I went to a Buddhist temple in Thailand. वहाँ जाके मैं ये नहीं सोच रहा specifically कि इसने ये क्यों किया, right? पर I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing and I will definitely think about that or learn from it later on at least. या कभी वहाँ जाके भी and I'm like यार oh there's a step here because I know कि for instance एक और commonality मैंने उसमें बात नहीं कि roofs पे ज़्यादा रहे पर one of the very common themes is almost all religious places have a step when you enter in. That's a way of again very human element. आप अब respect की जगह पे जा रहे हैं, जूते बाहर उतारने अब step है, right? And that's like another element that people use. So I will maybe sometimes think oh ये this step है या 3 steps हैं. I'll later maybe look at कि 3 क्यों होते हैं हर जगह पे. So I might be noticing things a little bit more. कि किसी religion में I'll see कि अच्छा या 5 होते हैं या 3 होते हैं या 7 होते हैं. There's probably something to do with 7 heavens होती हैं. That's actually a very common 7 arches type चीज़ें हैं Christianity में, Islam में. So I might think about along those lines. But mostly in these places I'm just so taken over by the experience. उस वक्त critique नहीं चल रही. Unfortunately वो critique वाला दिमाग वैसे बंद नहीं होता. Thank you everyone for coming. See you next time.